Hey guys, tonight we will drift along lantern-lit lanes where soft zither strings ring like dew and the evening mist feels friendly enough to hand you a cup of warm tea. We'll wander a Silla village together at the hour when rooftops blush with the last light, the courtyards breathe steam and cinnamon, and sandals whisper over packed earth. I'll keep the pace unhurried, the humor cozy, and the details so soothing that you probably won't survive this without nodding off by minute 3. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what the local time is, because I love imagining the world as one quiet hearth. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand beneath a wooden gate that remembers every season. The lintel carries a fringe of tiny bells. Their voices tremble with the slightest breeze, chiming like little promises. Mist gathers in the hollows of the road, cool on your ankles, silver around your knees, and the clay of the gateposts is the color of toasted rice. Lanterns wink awake along the lane, one by one, as if the village is gently blinking itself into night vision. From somewhere just past the corner, a gaiagum begins. One note drawn slowly, then another, then a tender ripple like rain threading through reeds. The sound points your feet the way a friend points with a smile. This way, and don't rush. You pass a pair of mango-colored gourds hung over a threshold for luck. The door beyond them stands ajar, and a low laugh drifts out. Someone telling a joke whose words you can't catch, yet you understand the warmth. A dog lifts its head and decides with great wisdom that you are not worth waking fully for. It sighs, circles once on its straw mat, and returns to dreaming of heroic scraps from the communal pot. You breathe in smoke from pine kindling, and behind it a sweeter scent, barley tea blooming in a kettle, and maybe, just maybe, pear slices drying on a rack. The zither's melody turns a corner, and you follow. Your sandals tap the packed earth. Da-da, hush. Da-da, hush. Clay tiles overlap like fish scales above you, patterned by years of weather, and the eaves host small swallows, quiet as folded fans. A woman in a blue jacket sweeps her doorstep with a bundle of twigs, moving slowly, the way you stir thoughts you want to keep. She pauses, smiles with her eyes, and tips the broom so that dust walks off the step and back to the road it knows. You lift a hand in greeting. Words are unnecessary. The music says what you mean. The gatehouse guardian, a carved wooden face on a pillar, meets your gaze with a mixture of solemnity and mischief. You incline your head and think, yes, the village can keep its secrets. You're only here to be carried along like a leaf in a shallow stream. The gaiagum plucks a playful phrase, and you drift past a courtyard where millet lies spread on mats to dry. A small boy chases his own shadow, and an old man pretends not to be impressed when the boy actually catches it. The old man fails at pretending. His grin escapes like a stray firefly. You step into a pocket of quiet where the lane narrows and leans between two walls. The plaster glows pale, and your shoulder grazes ivy that smells faintly of pepper and rain. Somewhere above, a wind chime, smooth river shells tied with twine, knocks gently, shyly, proud of its softness. The zither pauses, a single note ringing until it forgets itself, and then resumes with two chords spaced like footsteps across a puddle. You follow the space, and in that breath between notes, you can hear the earth settling under the day's stories, the roofs accepting starlight like a polite compliment. At the corner, a lantern stands on a tripod, its paper painted with cranes that seem ready to walk off into the evening. You stop there for a moment because stopping is part of moving. From the lane ahead comes the quiet bustle of bowls stacked, chopsticks counted, a pot lid lifted just enough to let the aroma escape, and check the time by scent. A friendly clatter, a lull of voices, a soft ah of approval when the lid closes again. The zither threads itself through all of that, not a performance so much as a kindness, music poured into the cracks where worry might otherwise live. A boy with a reed basket trots past, pauses, and offers you a folded leaf. Inside, 2 warm chestnuts sigh in their skins. You take them both, return one, and he nods like a merchant, pleased with the fairness of the trade. You break the remaining chestnut, the steam rising like the spirit of a small, contented cloud, and you eat the sweetness slowly, letting the heat settle your tongue, your jaw, your shoulders. The notes ahead widen, like stepping from shadow into a courtyard, and you sense an arrival, a welcome, arranged in sound rather than speech. You walk again. The lane slants slightly downhill, and on your right, a low wall breaks into a set of shallow steps that lead to a gate painted the red of persimmon flesh. Someone has hung a strip of cloth there, pine green, edged with hand-stitched waves, and it moves with such dignified laziness that you'd swear it was the head of the local council. You touch the cloth lightly and feel a map of the day's breeze. Even the air here seems well-mannered, happy to be helpful without showing off. Another turn, and there, the source. A young musician sits cross-legged on a straw mat in a small square just beyond the shadow of the gatehouse. The gaiagium rests on her lap, its wood the soft gleam of honey after sunrise. She regards you with a quick, amused glance that says, "Yes, stranger, the lane was the song, and you have walked it well." The strings hum under her fingers. She lowers her gaze, and the melody warms, curling around your ankles like a cat claiming you. Without speaking, she gestures with her chin towards a courtyard where steam lifts from shallow bowls and a teapot breathes. You understand, this is where your steps will learn to be slower than your thoughts. You bow a little, because the evening invites small ceremonies. The village exhales, the bells at the gate whisper back and forth, and you cross the threshold of that red gate, following the thread of notes into the place where tea promises to teach your hands the art of holding warmth without spilling any. Somewhere behind you, the mist rearranges itself into a curtain you won't need to close. Clay tiles lean over the lane like sleepy eyelids, and the air holds that warm, barley-scented hush that people call morning even when the moon hasn't entirely signed out. You move beneath the eaves where swallows nest like commas in an old poem, your footsteps keeping time with the soft measure of the gaiagium. The young musician, her hair bound with a ribbon the green of pine needles after rain, glances up from her mat, lifts her chin, and it is both invitation and instruction. Come, slower than you think, and let the steam teach you patience. You obey because resisting this village is like arguing with a lullaby. The courtyard waits behind a gate the red of ripened persimmon. Its threshold is a polished stone that remembers footfalls, and beyond it the ground is tamped earth, neat as a folded blanket. A low table sits at the center with bowls set like moons, shallow, earthen, warm to the eye even before the fingers confirm it. The kettle sighs on a brazier, a ribbon of steam unspooling upward, uncurling, recurling, rehearsing its own quiet dance. Someone has hung clusters of herbs along the wall, mugwort, perilla, and a braid of garlic, but their perfume only kneels at the door, careful not to upstage the barley tea. "Sit," the musician's eyebrows say, and you do, taking the place nearest the kettle, the prestigious post of steam receiver, a rank you earn by existing and breathing. The elder who tends the fire smiles without showing teeth, as though certainty doesn't need an exclamation point. With tongs he feeds the brazier a sliver of pine. The ember glows, the kettle hums, and the first pour blooms into your bowl with a sound like distant rain on rice stalks. He warns you, with a tiny wave of his fingers, not to rush, as if your entire personality hasn't already been demoted to sedate driftwood. You cradled the bowl, feeling the heat reach your palms, then your wrists, then that tender place where tiredness keeps a little apartment. You tilt the rim just enough to sip, and the barley opens soft and round, a roasted hush that seems to iron wrinkles out of the day, including those you brought without noticing. Conversation lifts and settles around you. A neighbor reports that the gourd vines finally found the string. Another mentions that the swallows under her eaves have negotiated a peace with the cat. Someone else swears the well water tastes like moonlight when drawn at the rabbit hour. The humor is gentle and thoroughly verified by nods. The musician sets her gayajum across her knees. She plucks 3 notes like tapping a friend's shoulder, then lets a 4th linger like a politely extended hand. You realize the lane itself has been a score, and this courtyard is a soft chorus. She does not perform, she accompanies the warmth, matching its slow clarity, stitching small silver bridges between sips. When a gust of air lifts the paper door, her melody bends with it, smiling at the breeze as though the two rehearsed earlier. Food arrives with the serenity of something inevitable. Small plates with pickled greens, coins of radish blushing from their brine, a modest slab of tofu glossed with sesame and whispered over by spring onions. A steamer lid lifts and clouds the moment. Inside rest millet cakes, speckled with pine nuts. The elder offers you one with chopsticks, and you, graduate of the Steam Receiver Academy, accept like a pro, neither dropping the cake nor flashing panic at its heat. The bite is tender, humble, entirely persuasive. It convinces your shoulders to resign from their post as guardians of tension. "Hold the bowl this way," the elder suggests, rotating his own so the rim meets the lower lip just so, and breathe across it. The steam will think you're friendly. You copy him, exhaling a thin ribbon over the surface, listening to the micro sigh it makes. The musician rewards this with a soft arpeggio that feels like a nod you can hear. You are being trained in the village's most dangerous art, doing almost nothing correctly. Between the posts that support the eaves, tiny charms dangle. Braids of straw tied with red thread, a shell polished by river time, a carved bead with a pattern like water ripples. They turn at the mercy of a shy wind and ask for nothing. In a shallow basin, a cat has collapsed into liquid, one paw over its face, a masterclass in boundaries. A child peeks through the gate, counts the bowls, decides there are enough for peace, and slips away like an echo that thinks better of itself. You take another sip. The barley reveals a sweet grain note that somehow tastes like warm sun on planks. You imagine the field that gave this flavor, the threshing, the toasting, the careful patience of someone who understands the choreography of heat. The elder names the tea without flourish. You repeat the syllables softly, letting them settle in your mouth like seeds in a palm. He approves with the tiniest tilt of the head, then taps the kettle lid. "Not quite," he murmurs to the water, which is the most generous kind of correction, addressed to heat, not to you. Across the courtyard, a low shelf holds everyday bowls, each with its own story of small heroic acts. Soups rescued from oversalt, broths shared when fevers kept families awake, porridge that learned how to comfort without boasting. The musician's gaze follows yours, and she smiles. If you listen carefully, even bowls hum. She plucks a note, and a bowl on the shelf, perhaps by chance, perhaps by conspiracy, gives a quiet, resonant answer. When your bowl is half empty, or half full, or completely itself, the elder refills it with the care of a scribe adding one more line to a poem that never ends. You're offered pear slices cooled in well water, their sweetness crisp as a good idea. The conversation circles back to the day's tiny triumphs, a cracked roof tile finally settled after a coaxing tap, a jar lid that stopped wobbling once shamed by a folded leaf, a reed mat turned with such grace it might run for local office. Every anecdote arrives without urgency and leaves with a bow. The moon slips behind a cloud, and for a breath the courtyard darkens to velvet. The musician tests a higher string, an answering silver line, and you catch the faintest roughness, like a whisper of wear. Nothing breaks, nothing needs fixing. Still, the evening makes a simple promise to tomorrow. We'll remember your edges. You set your bowl down, warm rings glistening on the wood and evaporating as quickly as worries should. When you rise, the elder presses a small sachet into your hand, roasted barley and a promise of hot water to come. The musician stands, gathers her geogum, and with a tilt of the head returns you to the lane. Beneath the clay roofs, the mist contracts, and the bells at the gate practice their tiny courage. You walk softer now, steam still in your palms, the melody drawing you onward like the faint line of path a lantern paints on stone. The village approves of your new slowness. The night, briefly, smells like the first hour of morning. The lane relaxes into a small market square, the kind that forgets about edges and just keeps becoming more itself the longer you look. Lanterns hang from eaves like pale moons practicing how to glow. Their paper bodies sway so slightly that the shadows beneath them move as if nodding in time with the gygium. The musician walks a pace ahead, her instrument tucked under one arm, and touches the strings with her thumb now and then, just enough sound to tell you, here, this stall, this smile, this bowl of something steaming that already recognizes you from the sachet in your pocket. Traders greet you with the polite delight reserved for guests who know how to be quiet. A basket maker taps the woven rim of a shallow tray, and it answers with a woody ring, proud to hold anything from herbs to gossip. He lifts another tray, smaller, its weave tight as a secret, and sets a handful of toasted barley into it. The grains wink like little suns. "A good year," his eyebrows announce. You nod, and your gratitude takes the scenic route through a tiny bow. Next to him, a woman sells spools of dyed thread that look like captured rainbows, who have learned discipline. Pine, persimmon, indigo, colors spoken in low voices. She loops a strand around your wrist for luck. ties it once, then changes her mind and ties it twice, which means extra luck or extra manners. You accept both. The musician plays a gentle figure that lands exactly when the knot finishes, and the vendor smiles at this orchestration as if the evening itself has taste. A ladle dips into a clay pot and returns with a modest soup, the color of contentment, the scent of spring onions and sesame, offered in a small bowl whose glaze remembers turning in the potter's hands. You breathe across the surface the way the elder showed you. The steam, flattered by recognition, softens against your face and sighs into the air. The first sip finds the place your ribs forgot to unclench and persuades it, kindly, to reconsider. Around you, haggling sounds like compliments that happen to move numbers. A vendor says, "Your taste is excellent," which translates to 2 coins more, and a customer replies, "Your judgment is flawless," which translates to 1 coin less, and somehow they both become right. The musician's melody threads between stalls, a quiet sweetness near the salted fish, a deeper hum beside the baskets of daikon and late pears, a playful flicker around the sweets vendor who has stacked rice cakes as carefully as a priest stacks blessings. He offers you a piece dusted with fine powder that sticks to your fingers just long enough to become part of your biography. You lick the powder away, dignified as royalty, eating crumbs in private, and the vendor nods, pleased to have participated in your character development. At a carpentry table, a man smooths a wooden spoon with a scrap of worn cloth, coaxing the grain to look like flowing water. He lets you try, guiding your hand until the motion changes from effort to rhythm. "Like breathing," he says without saying, and the spoon agrees by becoming softer under your touch. He gifts you a small one, barely more than a suggestion of a spoon, perfect for tasting future broths you haven't earned yet. The musician punctuates the moment with 2 notes that feel like a ribbon tied around a parcel. A vendor with jars, so many jars, lifts lids and introduces aromas as if presenting old friends. Plum wine with a laugh at the end. Fermented greens ready to star in a heroic side dish. Sesame oil that glows like a long story. You tip each jar politely and send a whisper of thanks after the lid, which is the sort of etiquette that makes lids behave. The jar lady nods at your manners, then leans in to stage whisper that her neighbor's soy paste saved a failing stew last night, which in this village counts as civic achievement. Somewhere a child giggles. Somewhere a dog declines to be involved. A gust nudges the lanterns, and your ribbons of wrist color swish, approving of the wind's taste. The musician glances at you, then at the path through the market that seems to arrange itself ahead of your feet. The geigium's higher string has a hint of rasp, no complaint, just honesty. And when she hears it too, she answers by choosing notes that make the rasp sound like texture rather than flaw. You file that away as a lesson you'll forget you learned and somehow still practice. At the edge of the square, a vendor of sandals takes your measure with his eyes, which are the most accurate tools he owns. He presents a pair made from straw and patience, the soles stitched with the kind of care you spot only after walking far enough. You try them. The earth rises to meet you an inch sooner, and your strides become a little more confident, as though the road itself has begun to remember your name. The man bows once deeply, exactly as if you had taught him something. From the far side, a tray arrives laden with small favors, persimmon slices, honey-dipped pine nuts, slivers of pickled gourd that practice the paradox of crisp tenderness. You accept a slice of persimmon, soft as dusk, and the juice glows against your tongue like a lantern deciding to tell a joke. The musician lets the punchline be a gentle slide of her fingertips, and the stall holders chuckle. In that way, markets chuckle, collectively, without a culprit. You move again, neither hurried nor halted, past a table of combs carved from bamboo, their teeth polished smooth as good intentions, past ropes of garlic that look like the moon tried to braid its own hair, past a brass mirror that gathers your face and gives it back not as a portrait, but as a rumor. The square spreads into a narrow apron of stalls where the air warms and you feel a low, even breath you first mistake for the night settling. But it has a rhythm, inhale, exhale, that belongs to fire tended by practiced hands. The musician's melody softens, turning like someone drawing a sleeve over a sleeping child. She tilts her head toward that steady warmth, and together you follow the line of it as the lantern shadows lengthen into quieter shapes. The market thins here, fewer voices, more glow, and the scent changes from sesame and pear to a chalky sweetness threaded with smoke. You put your new spoon in your sleeve and tuck the lucky thread against your wrist, proof that you belong to this gentle promenade of small kindnesses. Ahead, beyond a screen of reed mats, the breathing grows clearer, like a living creature practicing patience. The gygium steps down into a slower key, and the lantern closest to you steadies as if holding its breath on purpose. You lift the curtain of reed lightly, and warmth kisses your cheeks. Whatever waits there is not in a hurry to impress. It keeps its own time and invites you to borrow as much as you like. Inside the reed screen, warmth greets you like an old friend who doesn't ask questions. The kiln rests along a low slope, its clay body rounded and drowsy, the stoke mouth open just enough to show a small red language inside. Each exhale lifts a ribbon of pale smoke that writes temporary poems on the air before forgetting how to be letters. The potter raises a soot-dusted hand, palm outward. Welcome, but listen first. His hair is gathered in a cloth band, his sleeves tied back, and his eyes have the mild brightness of someone who measures time by color rather than by bells. The young musician takes a place beside the door and lays the ga-yagim across her lap. She doesn't so much begin as resume, as if the notes merely wandered off to fetch more night. A steady pattern, slow phrase, pause, slower phrase, matches the kiln's breath. You find yourself breathing with both of them, remembering the elder's lesson at the tea. Don't rush the steam, let it come to you. The potter smiles at your posture and taps the peephole with a thin stick. Look, say his eyebrows, and you peer through to see silhouettes, jars, bowls, a family of patient moons standing in a warm cave. On a mat nearby lies a mound of clay under a damp cloth, as calm as a sleeping dog. The potter lifts the cloth and cuts a wedge with a thin wire. The slice shows a tight spiral where water and earth shook hands. He places the piece in your palms. It is cool and a little shy. Knead, his hands instruct, folding, turning, pressing, an old choreography that wakes the clay's memory of riverbeds and rain. Your hands copy him. The clay surrenders pockets of air with tiny sighs, and when it grows supple and even, he nods and sets it on the wheel. His wheel is low and plain, a circle on a post. its motion made by the slow insistence of a foot. He shows you how to wet the surface with 2 fingers, then cups your hands around the lump to center it the way you might guide a skittish thought. The wheel turns, the clay hums, and then, miracle or simple physics, your hands rise, and the clay rises with them, narrow as a reed, then widening into a bellied jar that might someday escort pickles to a table or keep a family's secrets in miso. Your first attempt lists to the left, a moon after a long day. The potter softly laughs and names it weather report. The second holds straight, embarrassed by your attention but standing its ground. From the kiln, a low cough. The breath falters, a heartbeat skipped. The potter's head tilts. His apprentice, quick eyes, ash freckles, slides a grate aside and uses a slender paddle to adjust the stack of wood. The fire answers with a grudging purr. Then a breeze shifts outside, and smoke drifts back toward the stoke mouth in a single sulky ribbon. You sense the kiln's mood turn cautious. The musician handles the moment with grace. Her melody lowers, gentles, makes more space between notes. Let's try this patience. You remember breathing across your bowl to soothe the steam, and you mirror that calm now, though you're not entirely sure who needs it more, the kiln or you. Draft, the apprentice murmurs, showing 2 fingers almost together, barely. The potter nods toward a pile of split pine, resin-scented and dignified as elders at a festival. He chooses thinner pieces first, feeds them in with intervals counted in music rather than numbers. The flame licks, retreats, licks again, learning the new rhythm. Still, the breath stays shallow. The potter squints at the mortar seam around the door, touches it, and leaves a fingerprint in soft clay. A gap, a whispering leak. He kneels and mixes fresh slip with a twirl of his wrist. You kneel beside him, offering your steady hands. Together you press the clay into the seam, smoothing it as you would calm a friend's ruffled sleeve. The change is small and instant. The flame draws, the smoke leans forward as if listening. The kiln inhales more boldly, then exhales a sigh that the musician answers with a tender arpeggio. Your shoulders drop the last of their duties. The potter leans to the peephole and blinks. His eyebrows lift. Approval. Good, says his mouth without sound, and he taps your lucky thread with a sooty knuckle as if to credit it with a portion of the success. You grin, trying not to look like a person who has just glued night together. Work resumes in the gentle bustle that feels like the true language of craft. You learn to collar a jar's neck, nudging it inward with 2 fingers damp as morning. You learn to pull a lip without stretching it thin. Your third piece becomes a round-bellied companion, unambitious and very proud of its unambition. The potter marks its base with a small crescent, his sign and maybe yours. If it survives the firing, it will know soups and gossip and perhaps someday the delicate responsibility of being the bowl that holds someone's best evening. When the fire asks politely for more, you answer with 1, then 2 slender sticks. The apprentice rakes ember beds into a more thoughtful slope so heat can stroll rather than sprint. At the edge of the mat, troughs of slip wait like quiet ponds. A brush leans in one, and the apprentice paints simple, looping characters along the shoulder of a biscuit-fired jar, cloud, river, wind, names that double as blessings and triple as accurate weather predictions. He offers you the brush. Your hand draws a small wave, then another, the pattern you saw stitched on the persimmon gate cloth. The line wobbles once and then believes in itself. A tiny sound inside, not quite a crack, more like a complaint. Everyone goes still. The potter places his ear near the peephole, listening the way one listens to a sleeping child who turned over too quickly. He nods to himself, calculating patience. "Cooler there," the apprentice signs, sliding the paddle to shift a glowing stick and make a path for heat to circle rather than charge. The musician adds a warm note and lets it hang. Nothing breaks. The moment passes as softly as a cat returning to its basin nap. You realize the kiln prefers lullabies to heroics. Between stokes, the potter shows you trimming. He inverts a partly dried bowl and places it on a leather pad. With a looped tool, he shaves whisper-thin curls that fall and gather like pale noodles, revealing a foot ring as clean as a horizon. He hands you the tool. You coax 2 curls, then 3, until a small pedestal appears, modest and right. "Now it stands without trying," says his hands. The lesson tucks itself into you, beside the one about steam and the one about listening for rasp in a string. By the time the horizon has accepted its bead of moon, the kiln's breath is steady and slow. The apprentice seals the stoke mouth to a thumb's width and sets a clay tile against the draft. The potter wipes his hands, offers you a bowl of well water, and you drink the cold like an idea you wish you'd had earlier. He gestures toward a row of drying shelves where your jar, your unheroic, good-hearted jar, rests among cousins. You bow to it, because conceit is for mirrors. From the back of the yard, a faint rustle. Warp threads hanging to dry. Pine-dyed skeins shifting in the night's small wind. The musician notices, and her next phrase feels like a loom finding its rhythm. You catch a breath of resin and see the outline of frames beyond the kiln's glow. The potter nods toward them with a satisfied contentment of someone whose neighbors are also artisans. He pats the kiln once. "Sleep," his palm says to the clay dragon, and it agrees, going on breathing, easy and even. You step away with ash on your sleeves, the taste of wood smoke tucked somewhere kind in your chest, and your wrists remembering the weight of the jar as if it were a promise. The musician rises, the last chord low and round, and together you slip back through the reed screen. The night outside has become a soft cloth, and the lane, obliging as ever, offers to carry your feet toward the sound of threads whispering their own quiet plan. The resin-scented shade gathers beneath the pines like a long, cool breath after the kiln's warm exhale, and you welcome it with the posture of someone who has earned an intermission. Looms live here, wooden frames with the easy authority of old furniture that knows your weight before you sit. Threads hum in soft parallel lines. Heddles rise and fall like courteous eyebrows. Shuttles slip through the shed with the speed of fish that trust the river. The young musician rests her gayayum on a bench and lets one hand trail across the strings, scattering a scale that lands on bark and cloth alike. The note with the faint rasp returns, honest as a scuffed stare. She leans close, smiles at it, and plays a phrase that invites the blemish to sound like grain. A weaver in a pine-dyed jacket lifts her chin in hello and pats the bench beside her. Her hair is bound with cloth the color of dawn rinsed in water, and her hands move with the rhythm of course. She shows you the warp, taut as a well-kept promise, and the weft, loose as a good mood, then gestures for you to try sending the shuttle. In, beat, out. In, beat, out. Your first throw is diplomatic more than accurate. The shuttle pauses midstream to discuss terms with a thread that prefers autonomy. The weaver laughs quietly and taps the shuttle's nose so it remembers it's a visitor, not a politician. Your second throw glides, and the beater settles the weft with the sound of a soft decision. Steam rises from dye pots to the side, where a small brazier keeps them patient. One pot is the mellow gold of persimmon rind steeped with alum. Another holds indigo like a night that has agreed to be poured. A third simmers pine needles until their green becomes an idea your fingers can wear. The dyer, an aunt in spirit if not in family, lifts a strand with tongs, lets it drip, then lays it on a bamboo rack where the wind can interview the color. She swishes a narrow ribbon through the pine bath, and the air brightens the way a thought brightens when somebody finally supplies the word you were missing. "Would you like a talisman?" her eyebrow asks, and there's only one correct answer. She cuts a ribbon the width of a promise you can keep, hands it to you, and you feel the resin's polite stickiness, like a handshake that lingers half a second longer in welcome. She shows you the knot they favor here, neither sailors nor scholars, but something village-shaped. Loop, tuck, circle back, breathe across it the way you soothe the tea. You obey, exhale lightly, and the ribbon settles into itself, remembering your breath. The musician adds a two-note blessing, and the weaver ties the charm to your lucky thread so they don't feel competitive. The rhythm of the loom continues, heartbeat sure, then a small sound, a twang like a startled mosquito, and the warp yields one thread with ambitions of independence. It hangs loose, quivering with the drama of a poet exiting mid-recital. The weaver stills the beater, and everyone pauses in the way that does not invite panic. The dyer sets down her tongs. The musician places her palm on the gayayum's board and hushes the strings as if calming spirited horses. You feel the impulse to be helpful, which here means being unhurried furniture. The weaver threads a repair needle, licks the end in a ceremony as old as fabric, and splices the shy rebel back into the family with a whisper-thin overlap no one will notice except the cloth, which is the right audience. "Try," she suggests, handing you the shuttle again. You send it through with deliberate kindness, and the repaired line accepts you. The beater kisses the weft into place, no scolding, just agreement. The loom resumes its low hymn. Your shoulders perform that quiet dance they've been getting good at. Up, down, done. The musician rewards the teamwork with a mellow run, then leans close to the faintly rasping string and coaxes it into a small, contented purr. You realize everything in this village knows how to fail gracefully and how to be helped without apology. A younger weaver arrives carrying skeins of persimmon gold and indigo dusk. She offers you a choice for the ribbon's edge stitch, sun on water or moon on pond. You consider, glance at the kilnash still ghosting your sleeves, at the pine shade knitting itself above, and choose moon on pond, which earns you a nod from the trees. With a needle as fine as patience, she hems the ribbon's end, then threads a tiny bead, a seed-polished kernel of rice, so the charm will remember harvests. When she secures it, the bead catches a fleck of light and becomes briefly ambitious, then remembers modesty and settles down. They let you work a longer stretch at the loom, a few finger widths of fabric that will someday be a sleeve facing or a pocket no one brags about. Your rows are neat enough to avoid gossip. The weaver marks the selvage with a gentle pinch, a secret signature. You feel a domestic pride best measured in how willingly you would straighten that edge again tomorrow. The dye pots exhale a sweeter steam, the pine one especially, and the dyer laughs softly at how your face tilts toward scent like a sunflower that read the script but added improv. When your ribbon is fully dry, they tie it not to your wrist, but to the spoon tucked in your sleeve, the almost spoon the carpenter coaxed from wood. So your tastings will not forget where kindness lives, the dyer's eyes say. The charm hangs lightly, tapping the spoon with the confidence of a friend knocking on a familiar door. You promise not to let it drag you into reckless seasoning decisions. The weavers approve this restraint and gift you a second, shorter strand to leave somewhere important. Perhaps a gatepost, perhaps a jar. You think of your round-bellied jar cooling by the kiln and feel the idea click like a well-cut notch. Beyond the pines, a faint hush, water practicing its vowels. The weavers fold their cloth, brush stray threads from your lap as if tidying a guest room, and help you stand without spilling the moment. The musician lifts her instrument, tests the sky with a narrow phrase, and the rasp in the high string sounds almost like oars greeting a riverbank. You bow to the looms, to the dye pots, to the hands that made your ribbon remember breath. Resin follows you down the slope in a thin green perfume, and the path gentles toward the sound of moving water that has been expecting you since before you learned to walk this slowly. The path surrenders to riverbank without ceremony, a smooth change of sentence where gravel becomes damp sand and the air learns to smell rounder. Reeds whisper like polite neighbors exchanging weather, and the water itself keeps its long conversation, syllables repeating, never boring. Lantern frames lean along the shore, bamboo ribs bound with thin cord, skin of oil-brushed paper waiting for night, and beside them a low boat rocks with the patient confidence of an old chair. The boatman lifts a hand. His palm is river map brown, lines deep enough to hold directions. He wears a grin that says he's seen many festivals and one or two spectacularly modest disasters, and he still likes both the river and people who try to read it. The young musician sits on the bank with her gayajam across her knees. She plucks a scale that listens to the current first, then answers. The high string's faint rasp returns friendly as a cricket. The boatman turns an ear toward it and nods. The river always keeps one rough voice to remind us we're live. He shows you the lanterns. The paper has been brushed with a light varnish of sesame oil and good luck. When you lift one, it flexes with the confidence of something taught to endure breeze and compliments. Inside, a shallow saucer waits to cuddle a wick. The boatman trims each wick with a thumbnail, no fuss, leaving a small crown of fibers that will glow without dramatics. He hands you a dish of wicks and a knife so modest it apologizes for being sharp. Not too long, his eyebrows caution. Long wicks talk too loud. You think of the elder's kettle and breathe across your impatience. Fire travels here not in sparks, but in manners. A clay ember cup nests a handful of coals from a brazier under the willow. The boatman lifts one with long tongs and settles it in a sheltered tray, then invites you to lean close with a pine sliver. The ember gives a thin, fox-colored flame, steady if you keep your promises. You touch the wick's tip, watch it darken, blush, then shine like a small, confident thought. 1, then 5, then 10. Your hands learn the rhythm. Tip, hush, bloom. The musician rewards each steady light with a 2-note blessing, and the river answers by smoothing a wrinkle near the reeds, which counts as applause. He leads you to the oar. It's a long, quiet creature, its blade rubbed to silk from years of being the last word. He shows how to stand, feet planted, knees soft, hips loose as if bowing to a generous aunt. Feather, his shoulders say, and he dips the blade so flat it kisses the surface without kissing and then turns it to grip the water on the return. You try. Your first stroke is a respectable rumor. The river hears it, raises an eyebrow, and decides not to gossip. Your second stroke finds purchase, and the boat slides forward, agreeing with you more than you deserve. Listen there, the boatman points, chin toward a line where smooth dark meets ruffled silver. Seam. The word arrives through his fingers, not his mouth. You nod, storing it near weather report jar and moon on pond hem. He names other quiet words. Cat's paw, where wind sprinkles coins on the surface. Eddies, looping back like children denied a second dessert but returning anyway. Backwater, where the river rests and you never argue with its decision. He has signals that aren't quite signals. A tilt of the oar to say hold, a slackening of rope to say yes, a single knock on the hull to say you'll be fine even if you briefly aren't. You practice sculling in place, the oar painting figure eights that you feel more than you see. The musician lowers her melody to the boat's pace, letting the rasping string become a little star that flickers on beat 3. The boatman grins. Good for moths, his eyes twinkle. And right on cue, a moth inspects a lantern and decides this particular sun is too well-behaved to conquer. He shows you the tying of barges. 2 shallow boats, then 3, linked by rope that has outlived its first owner and intends to outlive the second. Knots are neither sailors' boasts nor scholars' decorations here. They are agreements. He favors a simple bend that can be untied after a night of gratitude, and he teaches you with the patient pace of someone who ties weather for a living. Loop, gift the tail, tuck. Pat the knot as if it were a sleepy dog. Your pine-dyed ribbon watches from your sleeve, approving the humility of a knot that wants to be useful more than famous. A boy runs down with oil flasks and squeaky pride. He claims to be the assistant in charge of not spilling. The river claims to be interested. The boatman lets him fill trays under your supervision. You steady the funnel, breathe across the impatience in his hands, and together you avoid decorating the hull with a shiny accident. The boy beams. High official of not making a mess, says his stance. You knight him with the pine sliver. He salutes with a very serious grin. As dusk composes itself, the boatman invites you aboard. The hull's low sides crowd the shape of the river, and the water knocks politely under the planks to announce itself, though you already feel it in your knees. He pushes off with one slow shove. The world retreats a respectful thumb's width. The current owns the first sentence. You finish it with light oar strokes that keep the bow pointed where the lanterns want to write. Reeds lean, listening. A heron lifts, decides you are not news, and keeps its secrets. He has a way of reading bends by scent and sound. There, his nostrils say, and sure enough, the river darkens to ink near a cluster of rocks the size of important thoughts. He steers you toward a seam, and the boat steps over the darker patch like a cat avoiding a puddle. The musician plays a phrase that spreads like oil on water, and for a second your mind is only the blade's gentle turn, the oars' steady exhale, the twins of lantern light on both boat and face. Halfway across, the wind swings a little harder, polite mischief. Several wicks gutter and argue with their own smoke. The assistant of not making a mess reaches for oil with heroic speed. Easy, the boatman's fingers say. Let the breeze arrive before you chase it. You angle your palm near a flickering cup, making a windbreak the size of kindness. The flame remembers its job and stands up straighter. You circle, hand to hand, sheltering 3, then 4. The musician mirrors you, small palms against small storms. The musician plays lower now, a riverbed hum, and the high strings rasp disappears, replaced by a clean, sure tone that feels like proof. Sometimes a breeze heals what it ruffled. You drift under willows that comb the sky. The boatman teaches you the tongue knock, 2 soft taps, 1 long pause, like a friend calling from outside your gate with good gossip and better manners. You practice, and a lantern on shore answers with a slight brightening, which might be magic or might be an oil bubble deciding to be helpful. Either way, the river smiles, which is to say, its small ripples applaud without getting anyone wet. When you return to the bank, the light has become the kind of blue that presides over festivals and kind conclusions. You and the boatman lift the lantern frames into the boat, nest them as carefully as sleeping children, and tie the modest knots that will remember how to untie themselves at dawn. He presses into your palm a spare wick, coiled, cooperative, ready, and taps your ribbon, your spoon charm, the ash on your sleeve, counting your small inheritances. Enough, his grin decrees. More than enough. The musician stands. She plucks a final low phrase that leaves a door ajar for night. You bow to the river and the hands that translated it. As you step back onto the path, you feel the oar's lesson settle beside the kilns and the looms. Hold lightly. Listen longer. Let the current finish its thought before you add yours. Behind you, the boat rocks once, twice, and then becomes still enough to share its stillness with the sky. The path tilts toward the shoulder of the hill. Stone steps set so kindly even your knees feel flattered. Pines stand like listening elders. Their long needles comb the wind into soft threads that drift over your face and settle your thoughts. The musician keeps pace at your side, thumb floating across her strings now and then, letting a phrase unfurl and then lie down as if to nap on the next step. The high string rasps again. Nothing dramatic, just a papery whisper, like a page turning in a well-behaved book. You glance at her. She winks and plays a phrase that turns the rasp into character rather than complaint. The village seems to have trained even flaws to mind their manners. The hillside temple waits in a clearing that smells of sun-warmed wood and rain that hasn't happened yet. Its eaves curved like a smile that learned humility, and chimes hang from each corner, little leaves of bronze that speak in breezes. A bell house stands to one side, ribs of timber around a bronze body the color of old tea. The bellkeeper appears at the threshold in a jacket faded by 1,000 dawns. He lifts 2 fingers, half blessing, half please notice the view, and you do. The valley all unrolled below, lines of roofs like careful handwriting, the river practicing its cursive, far terraces catching light like scales. He has a teapot the size of a modest gratitude, and a brazier that pretends not to be proud of its steady coals. Sit, his shoulders suggest, which here translates to, let stillness sit on you. You and the musician settle on a woven mat. The bellkeeper rinses the cups with hot water first, tiny weather systems rolling inside them, then pours mountain tea that looks like clear thought. Steam trims itself into ribbons. Without speaking, he gestures for you to breathe across the cup, and you obey, remembering the elder's lesson. The steam likes you immediately, which is the kind of hospitality that ruins you for city life. The first sip is pine and stone and a rumor of sweetness if you promise to be patient. It slides into your chest and politely reshelves the clutter. The musician plays a line that follows the sip down, and the bellkeeper's eyes do that narrow smile elders use when the universe behaves. He tilts his head toward the bell rope, a braided length worn smooth by hopes, and invites you. Light, his fingers warn, and you nod, because this is not a gong for chasing geese. You stand, take the rope, and feel the bell's weight through it, enormous and calm, a sleeping ox that trusts your hands. You do not pull, you suggest. A breath, a sway, another breath. The clapper kisses the bronze, and the sound rises not like a shout, but like a lake learning to sing. It enters your ribs and tucks itself in. The chimes answer with glittering syllables, and the wind translates everything into one long sentence. Yes, yes, perhaps rain. Clouds assemble above like discreet committee members. The bellkeeper pours the second cup, the one that tastes more like itself than the first. We could use soft weather, his silence says, glancing at the valley terraces. You think of rice stems awaiting the comfortable weight of drops, of jangdok jars on hill platforms, breathing the balances of salt and sun, hoping the air will remember how to be gentle. The musician lowers her hand to the rasping string, presses near the bridge with a fingertip, and the note clears slightly, enough to behave. The bellkeeper nods. A good string tells you it's weather, his eyebrows offer, and you file the phrase beside seam, moon on pond, and weather report jar. He shows you a small wooden fish, the moktok, its hollow belly tuned for timekeeping. You tap it with its mallet, soft, softer, softest, until the sound becomes a pulse you can lean your back against. The bell adds a long vowel now and then, the chimes sprinkle consonants, and the Gayajam walks between them, barefoot, unhurried, choosing where to step. Wind fingers the prayer slips along the rail, and one loose slip tries for flight. You catch it by instinct. Look at you, assistant to not making a mess, promoted to mountain division, and tuck it back under its red thread. The bellkeeper pretends not to clap. On the veranda, a line of shoes keep each other company. A cat occupies the middle of the row and refuses to negotiate. Beyond the veranda, a stone basin receives water from a bamboo spout with a rhythm that is either ancient poetry or just very competent plumbing. Either way, it calms you to pieces. You wash your hands, the cool riding your skin like a well-trained horse, and the tea tastes even clearer afterward, as if gratitude rinsed the cup again from inside your mouth. Listen, the bellkeeper's chin tilts toward the slope. A low wind comes around, not the gossiping sort but the librarian kind that knows which book you need. It carries a dampness at its hem. Leaves flip their paler sides like fans accepting assignments. Somewhere below the river lengthens its vowels. The musician finds a phrase that echoes the wind exactly, and for a heartbeat the world aligns. Bell, chime, string, pulse, breath, you. Then the wind pushes a bit harder, a prayer slip lifts, a ribbon on your spoon charm taps your sleeve, the brazier flame leans west and considers opinions. The bellkeeper shelters the kettle with a hand, not hurried, not heroic. You mirror him with the tray of cups. The musician lowers her instrument to shield the fire's flank. The gust tries again, fails to misbehave, and moves on to bother a pine that has seen worse. The kettle resumes its barely a simmer. The bellkeeper rewards this collective competence with a third pour, the cup that acts like a friend who knows exactly when to stop talking. You step to the rail and look over the village. From here, the market square is a coin, the kiln's reed screen a small, patient stitch, the loom yard a neat geometry in pine shade, the river a long brush stroke, still drying. You touch the pine-dyed ribbon on your wrist and think of the jar cooling by the kiln, of looms asking politely for rain-proofed air, of lanterns waiting to become constellations on water. The bellkeeper follows your gaze and, without ceremony, hands you a slender paper charm to tie where you like. You loop it around your spoon, knot, tuck, breathe, and it sits there, agreeing to remember the mountain. Clouds thicken into a friendly ceiling. On the far ridge, a single vellum gray sheet slides over the sun and edits the light into soft grammar. The bellkeeper strikes the bell once more, the sound draping the valley like a shawl. Even the cat blinks in sentence-length calm. You realize you are full of tea and silence, and a feeling with no proper name that acts like belonging. When you rise to go, the bellkeeper bows just enough to tip a drop of steam from the kettle's lid. You bow back, tucking the Moktok tap in your pocket the way people tuck a steady heart into a busy day. The musician plays a parting phrase that ascends like swallows, and the wind, extremely pleased with itself, braids that phrase into the moving air. Somewhere below, terraces wait with patient green, jars breathe under their lids, and the lanes make room for footsteps practicing slowness. You start down the steps, bell deep in your chest, wind soft at your back, and somewhere in the middle of your bones, a rumor of rain begins to organize itself into a plan. Terraces step down the hillside like a careful song, each patty cupping the sky in a shallow bowl. The wind combs the tops of the stalks. The green leans and straightens in tidy waves, as if the field were practicing polite bows. You follow a narrow path along the bund, shoes whispering on wet earth, hands brushing the sweet tassels that tickle your fingers and then forgive you for being curious. Below, the river writes its long sentence, but up here, everything speaks in short, steady phrases. Leaf, drop, frog, leaf. The musician walks beside you, the gayagum held against her hip, and lets a low figure settle under the field's breath. The high string rasps once, then learns to purr. Maybe the bellkeeper's wind has smoothed it, or maybe the terraces have opinions about intonation. At a wide landing, the path turns toward a cluster of stone platforms, each one hosting a community of jars. Their round shoulders wear clay lids like hats too dignified to slip, and each stands on low feet to keep off damp. The air smells of soy, sun, salt, and patience. A grandmother in a jacket the brown of good earth waves a ladle as greeting, then points the ladle at the jars as though introducing relatives. This one knows pepper. That one prefers quiet. That tall cousin could fix a dull stew with a single spoon. You bow to the entire assembly because diplomacy has become your hobby. She lifts a lid. A warm, savory bloom rises, deep and round like a drum with manners. Her granddaughter brings a thin stick and a curl of paper, and together they test the seal, listening for the little kiss of air where a lid wants adjusting. You remember the kiln's breathing and the way a slip seam soothed it, and your hands itch to be helpful. The grandmother places a flat stone on one lid's rim, nudges clockwise, and the kiss becomes a sigh. There, say her knuckles, and you store the trick beside your oar seam and your loom repair. A low table appears the way meals appear when ovens and kindness conspire. Bowls lacquered dark as quiet lakes, plates of greens glossed with sesame, radish coins wearing a blush, pancakes the color of harvest moons, flecked with spring onion and a little bravado. A pot of stew sets itself down with a confident breath, soy-rich, vegetable-soft, the sort of stew that practices the art of explaining life without lecturing. Someone orders you into a seat with laughing eyebrows. The musician positions herself at the edge, where she can be both wall and lullaby. Before you lift the lid of the stew, you remember the Academy of Steam Receiver and breathe across the surface. It fogs your face with approval. Your spoon, virtue ribbon tied to its neck, taps the rim exactly once, then dips and returns with a modest mouthful. You taste. The stew is a soft river of umami and garden afternoons. It finds a chair inside your chest and sits down with excellent posture. The grandmother watches for the verdict the way a captain watches the horizon. You nod, solemn as a magistrate approving a new bridge, and she cracks into a smile so wide that the jars decide to glisten. Rice arrives. Pearl and barley friends, each grain still itself, none getting pushy. You mound a little hill, burrow a ladle of stew into it, and crown the crater with a thread of sesame oil that pretends to be shy. Pickled greens flank the mountain like excellent advisors. A child brings you a leaf of perilla and demonstrates how to wrap rice, greens, a sliver of pancake, a little whisper of paste, fold, tuck, breathe, then feeds it to you with the blunt authority of a general. You accept, because your new rank is Minister of doing almost nothing correctly, and this seems within portfolio. The musician's melody keeps a table pace, low, steady, designed to make chopsticks remember where they were going. When the high string catches on a dry patch, she presses near the bridge with 2 fingers, and the rasp softens to texture. The grandmother hums in harmony, which might be gratitude, might be a recipe inside out. She ladles you a second serving with the ceremonial gravity of someone launching a small ship, and you launch it exactly where it belongs. Beyond the platforms, a boy in charge of rain luck flaps a windsock shaped like a carp. Clouds impressed by the paperwork drift closer. The valley shifts into a light the color of linen rinsed well. A drop lands on your wrist, cool and convincing. The grandmother lifts her eyes, then her ladle. "Cover," her chin says, and the courtyard responds like a practiced chorus. Lids that were ajar slide into position. Flat stones settle like careful commas. A reed mat leans against the windward side to break the drop's enthusiasm without accusing the weather of rudeness. You help where hands are needed, laying a mat just so, fingers on the cool of clay, listening for that pleasant seal sigh you chased at the kiln. One jar, stubborn, insists on wobbling. You lay your pine-dyed ribbon across its lid for a second, breathe, then tuck a sliver of leaf under one foot. The wobble gives up. The jars approve your diplomacy by smelling even better. Rain patters, not a scold, a blessing. The jars breathe through their vents, the stone platforms drink their share and hold the rest for the air. You and the others retreat half a step to the eaves and go on eating, for rain does not interrupt dinner, it performs with the musicians. The guy again becomes a soft drum, fingertips murmuring a rhythm that helps the drops remember where they are in the song. A girl counts in whispers, 1, 2, 1, 2, then loses count and laughs, which is also correct. The pancakes grow fragrant, and you help flip a few more on the flat stone, a brave act that earns applause from precisely one cat. The stew deepens the way stories do when the teller decides to trust you. Someone pours you a small cup of something plum and not entirely modest. You sip and feel a small, civilized fire make its way down with friendly intentions. The grandmother taps your spoon charm and nods towards your pocket. You draw out the second small ribbon the weavers gave you, the one meant for somewhere important. She lifts a brow towards her favorite jar, a veteran of winters and weddings, and you tie the ribbon around its handle. Loop, tuck, breathe. The knot settles like it belongs to this hill. The shower lightens. Rice fields shine with newly learned words. A breeze fills its lungs with leaf scent and then strolls on, checking fences. The grandmother removes the reed windbreak from one platform, and the jars peep from under their hats like dignitaries after a gentle speech. The boy with the carp windsock salutes the clouds. The clouds pretend not to notice and behave anyway. After the second bowl, and the third, which history will say never happened, you stand, stretch, and feel the kind of fullness that does not ask for apology. On a low table near the steps, squares of mulberry bark soak in a tub, pale as moon milk. A man with hands the color of clean clay lifts a sheet of wooden screen and swishes the water, letting fibers settle in thin, even dreams. He glances up and Tilt smiles. Tomorrow the market will carry new paper, the sort that likes ink and the scent of kites. Children drift closer, holding thin bamboo frames not yet skinned. The musician's melody rises half a breath, and you sense the evening rewriting itself for flight. The grandmother sends you away with a gourd of stew for luck, which here clearly means for later mouth happiness. You bow to the platforms, to the lids, to the ribboned veteran jar, and to the rain that remembered its manners. The path curves back toward the lane, your soles soft on wet earth, and ahead, near the papermaker's vats and the bamboo frames, you hear laughter tangled with a new skittering sound, like a frame testing the air before it agrees to be a kite. Your spoon charm taps your sleeve twice, eager for whatever the wind plans next. The papermaker's yard opens like a pale book, each that a page, each screen a quiet sentence you learn by touch. The air smells faintly sweet, mulberry bark softened in long patience and cool water, and the breeze moves through the bamboo frames so gently that sound arrives as a hush you can taste. The man with clean clay hands, your earlier glimpse from the terraces, lifts a wooden frame, the Sioux, and swishes the vat in a practiced figure 8. Fibers gather and settle, a drifting cloud deciding to be a sheet. He flips the frame, couching the new layer onto a felted pad, and the sound is a kiss between water and intention. The young musician stands under the eaves, her gayajum resting against a pillar, thumb tracing a line that follows the papermaker's rhythm. The high strings rasp returns as a small burr, but tonight it behaves. You hear it like a grain in wood that proves the tree once met the wind and didn't budge. Children gather with bamboo crosses for kites, their frames tied with the easy certainty of little wrists that trust knots to remember their jobs. A girl holds a pot of thin paste and a brush cut from grass. She grins at you, then paints the paste in long, confident strokes across the bamboo, before helping a boy lay down to skin a fresh sheet, translucent as fog, eager to dry into flight. Sheets leave the press, layer felt, then lift, one by one, onto a smooth board where a woman rubs them flat with a deer-bone burnisher. She works the surface in circles, coaxing the shine that makes ink behave. The circles look like wind drawn on silence. Another hand paints a quiet wash of alum on a stack, sizing, the papermaker's way of telling future ink not to wander. You hold the edge of a drying board, careful as a waiter with dignity. The sheet trembles against your fingers, then decides you deserve its trust and settles. Sky prayers. The burnisher's chin points toward a low table where smaller squares wait. A boy dips a brush and writes neat wishes in ink the color of river stones. Rain when needed, jars that stay brave, rice that remembers to be generous, grandfathers who nap deeply. A girl adds drawings, fish, a carp windsock, a spoon with a ribbon tied perfect, little jokes that feel like blessings wearing pajamas. You try a character or two. Your line wobbles once, then learns humility. The boy blows the ink gently, one warm breath, and your attempt dries into something almost legible, which here is as good as prophecy. The kite maker sits cross-legged, legs folded like a tripod he forgot to set aside. His knife is a sliver of moon. It whispers through bamboo and leaves edges that feel made by water. He lashes the spine to the crossbar with thread as soft as hair. He favors the knot that unties when you look at it the right way. Nothing prideful, nothing permanent. Agreements over edicts. He gestures for you to try. Loop, gift the tail, tuck, pat the knot like a sleepy dog. Your pine-dyed ribbon peeks from your sleeve, amused that knots have become a theme in your evening. The musician lingers near, letting her melody lean into breeze. The rasping string chatters like a curious sparrow. She presses near the bridge, and the sparrow tucks its head and purrs. She glances toward the river. The bend is visible from here through a stand of willows, a darker brushstroke in the long sentence of water. You can almost see last light gathering there, deciding to be peach or pearl. The boatman's word returns to you, seam, where smooth dark meets ruffled silver. Children parade their kites around the drying racks, tails of thin paper stitched with their sky prayers. A grandmother ties a sprig of pine at each tail's end, resin for luck, needle for direction. The sky likes a little perfume, her eyebrows insist. A boy holds a spool of thread and looks at you with the authority of an emperor. Hold? You accept, become immediate minister of spools, and learn that thread sings in a very small voice when you let it run without hurry. The first kite rises at the lane's mouth, catching the valley's exhale. Another leaps, hesitates, agrees. You and the boy ease the spool. The paper glows the way bowls sometimes hum, quietly, for those paying attention. Sky prayers flutter along the tails, tiny syllables the wind reads and nods at. A girl's kite draws a slow circle above the vats, a lantern without fire. The papermaker smiles with the satisfaction of someone whose craft finds its proof by leaving. A gust saunters in from the bend, not rude, just confident. One of the boys, the bold one, who earlier declared himself assistant to not making a mess, wants higher altitude immediately. He runs, spool high, thread singing, and his kite delights in the ambition. The gust lifts harder. The spool spins too freely. Feather, you say, remembering the boatman's palm and oar, but the boy's knees translate enthusiasm differently. The thread races through your fingers before you can offer wiser friction. The kite, laughing louder than is prudent, climbs straight toward the willows. The girl with paste gasps. The musician's phrase stumbles, the rasping string announcing its burr like a throat cleared at the wrong moment. The bold boy plants his heels and tries to become a tree. The knot on the spindle, a good knot but proud of its speed, decides to argue with itself. For a breath, the kite pugs like a fish, and then the line snaps with a sound too small for the size of the boy's eyes. The kite darts free, a pale leaf suddenly promoted, and rides the gust toward the bend. You move before deciding to. So do others. The papermaker lifts a pole with a hook. The kite maker grabs a long bamboo. The grandmother unties her apron like she's about to administer first aid to the sky. The boy lurches forward, hands up, apology blooming and collapsing between heartbeats. Across the yard, sheets shiver on their boards. The musician stands, instrument against her hip, eyes fixed on the moving scrap of brightness arrowing down toward water. Her melody falters, then thins to a single string of sound as if she could lasso the kite with a note. It doesn't reach. You follow the kite's path through the willows, watching for that seam where the smooth dark might accept a new guest. The wind shifts, smug with its stunt. The kite slides, skips, and then vanishes behind a green curtain that keeps the river's secrets. The mouth makes a small O. The papermaker's pole is 3 strides too short and not remotely a ladder. Even the cat looks concerned, which in this village is rare as a boast. For a breath, the yard holds its lungs. Far off, a heron rises and declines to give an opinion. The musician drops her hand and the last note dissolves. You feel the oar's lesson knocking in your wrist, the boatman's seam in your ear, the memory of lantern barges waiting like patient stars. The river, below the willows, voices a new consonant. You don't have to say the thought out loud, everybody hears it assembling. Find the bend, listen for the seam, and go gently. For a heartbeat, the yard holds its lungs. Then the village remembers how to move. Lanterns lift from hooks, wicks trimmed with thumbnail wisdom. A clay ember cup wakes and begins sharing small suns. The paper maker presses a handle into your palm, and the kite maker slips you a coil of thread like a promise you can rewind later. The bold boy, assistant to not making a mess, stares at the willows with a face that wants to be brave and small at the same time. You set a hand briefly on his shoulder, a touch the size of a yes. The young musician draws one quiet line across her gaya yum. Thin as a reed, steady as breath. Follow the note, her eyes say, and the note obliges by pointing down the lane. Lanterns bloom one by one along the market's edge, not as panic, as procedure. Traders fold cloth, cap jars, speak to each other in the grammar of errands. You check that corner, I'll ask at the kiln, someone mind the river bend without scaring the heron. The boatman jogs in, hair slightly more wind than usual, makes a small two-finger sign toward the water. He'll skim the bank for kite and kid both, and receives a lantern whose flame bows in respect. The bellkeeper, far uphill, must feel the air change. A single bronze vowel drifts down, long and low, marking the valley like a string tied around its finger. You and the musician take the lane that remembers footsteps. Your lantern paints a neat coin of light on the stones. Hers trails a ribbon that flutters with the music. She plays barely enough sound to be a path. One note and space. Another note and more space, so the village can hear you coming. The high string rasp returns, a dry leaf in a good book. She strokes the board near the bridge to tame it, and the rasp agrees to be texture. Shadows bow and step aside. A dog thinks about helping, considers its credentials, decides emotional support from the doorstep is nobler. At the kiln yard, the reed screen breathes. The potter emerges with ash on his sleeves, the apprentice a half step behind, two faces lit from below by a patient red. See him? Your eyebrows ask. The apprentice's palm flutters. Maybe. Then he points to the slope where a bit of kite tail gleams like a fish scale caught in ivy. The potter touches his peephole as if checking the kiln's pulse, then tightens a slip seam with two quick strokes and joins you, reed pole in hand. The musician answers with a phrase that feels like a door held open. You pass the looms. Under the pines, heddles hang at attention. The weavers have left a ribbon tied to the path stump as a wayfinder, pine-scented and green as advice. Here, the weaver ant murmurs without words, and presses a little cone of salt into your hand, old habit against getting lost. You tuck it beside your spoon charm. The dye pots still steam, indigo dreaming midnight. A droplet ticks like a very polite clock. The lane kinks where stone meets packed earth. You stoop and find a scuff, a small sandal, turned briefly sideways in decision. Beside it, a smudge of paper paste on a wall, the Sky Prayer Child's handwriting in wet white. Someone has stamped a faint fish on the corner with a thumb the size of worry. You look up. The musician's note draws you left where an oil lamp above a gate makes a halo for 3 gourds. They shine like moons who applied just enough makeup. The market square is changed, but not frightened. Stalls stand like patient actors between lines. Jar lady lifts a lid, listens, decides the soy can manage without her for a while, then points you toward the rice terrace path. You shake your head, river first, because the boatman's seam has been steering your thoughts since the kite dove. The square approves this logic and lends you a second lantern. The assistant of not making a mess takes charge of oil flasks with ceremonial gravity, promoted now to acting secretary of keeping flames well behaved. He walks at your elbow, small feet fierce, jaw set like a good knot. At the gourd gate you pause and breathe across the lantern cup. The flame answers with steadiness, remembering your courtesy from tea. A cat, the same diplomat who applauded pancakes, follows precisely 3 paces and no more, offering moral support under strict contractual terms. The musician turns her melody to a slightly lower key so it can roll under doors. Somewhere ahead, a window shutter bumps then settles, like a thought that almost escaped. Willows approach. Wind threads through them with just enough mischief to make whispering sound like advice. You probe the fringe with the reed pole, careful not to lecture the river. A scrap of paper kisses the lantern rim and sticks, one of the small sky prayer squares. The ink has blurred into kindness, but you can still read a word. Rain. Of course. You smooth the edge, press it to your sleeve, and feel the wish hum against your skin. The river answers with a tiny consonant, a sound you know from the boat, a backwater making room. Seam, you breathe, and the musician sends a note to ride the word. The boatman's lantern winks from downstream, a small star teaching the reeds manners. 2 knocks drift over water, the docking call he drilled into your wrist. You answer with 1 knock on a willow trunk and see his light nod. No boy, his silhouette shrugs. Kite, maybe, caught there. He points his chin to a darker nest of branches. The potter plants his pole and sweeps gently. Paper flakes return like approving birds, but the kite keeps it secret. Later, the boatman signs. He will persuade the river with patience, not argument. So the lanes again. You circle back from the willows and the musician's song thins to a silver thread you can follow blindfolded. The bell-keeper sends a second bronze breath. Somewhere a chime under an eave answers in miniature. You pass the elder's gate. The kettle must be dozing, no sound. But the air remembers barley and calls you steam receiver under its breath. You smile despite the small tightness in your chest shaped like a boy's brave face. At the carpentry table, the spoonmaker lifts his lamp. He points to a set of footprints, 2 larger, 1 smaller, then holds up a palm, old, earlier. He scans your group, sees the boy with the oil, and offers him a shallow wooden tray. For the flame, his hands say, so your fingers can be busy with finding. The boy accepts, stands taller by 1 humble inch. The tray makes the lantern less wobbly, the flame approves. A faint noise behind you, a hiccup of sound. Not bird, not cat, not river. The musician freezes, then plucks 3 notes soft as apology. The answer comes, a thin hum, fragile, the kind children use when they want to become courage by pretending to sing. It leaks from the narrow alley between the jar lady's wall and the broom seller's shed, the sort of sliver of space where a kite could slice by and a heart could follow. You push the lantern into that seam of shadow. Ivy, glossy as quiet, breathes on the wall. A clay water jar sits sentry, cool enough to teach manners. The hum swells and collapses. You hear sniffs, that staccato of tears reconsidered. The musician kneels at the mouth of the alley and plays the phrase she used to teach wicks to bloom. Tip, hush, bloom. But now it is note, hush, note. The rasp in her high string lifts, then catches, rougher than before. She presses the board. The rasp refuses and frays, a small complaint that drags like a pebble in a shoe. The boy with the tray looks up at you. You nod, and he holds the lantern steady while you lean in, not grabbing, not scolding, just letting your voice be a soft dock. Easy, you say to the dark, and to the frightened sound inside it. A shape unknots against the far wall, a little bundle in a jacket the color of dusk. Fingers unclench from a paper tail stub. The kite is elsewhere. The courage stayed behind and needs escort. The musician tries 1 more high note to sweeten the invitation. The string finally gives the opinion it has been storing. Snap. Not a shout. A small, tired surrender. The note dies with the thread, and the alley folds itself around the quiet. The child's breath catches. Yours pauses. Then the musician smiles, a slow, sure curve that rearranges the night. It's all right, her eyes tell the alley, and you can feel the next part assembling itself. Steady hands, borrowed moon, a lesson in silk and patience. For now, you keep the lantern warm, the space gentled, the path open, before the night folds completely over the fields. You keep the lantern steady and let your voice be the dock the small boat needs. Easy, you say again, and the alley loosens a finger. The little bundle unfolds, knees smudged, cheeks wet, the paper tail stub clutched like a tiny handle on courage. The musician hums, no instrument now, just breath shaped into a cradle. The boy with the tray eases closer, sets the flame low, and produces with ceremonial gravity a rice cake from his pocket that he absolutely did not steal. He merely safeguarded it from loneliness. The child accepts the cake, bites, and remembers how to be a person who swallows. Come, your hand suggests, palm up, not grabbing. The child tests the light between you and the wall, then chooses you, the way footsteps choose a well-swept path. Outside, the alley unspools into the lane. Ivy exhales. The cat pretends its presence was crucial. Jar Lady appears as if drafted by kindness and wipes the child's face with a corner of her sleeve, which has done this job before. She tucks the stub of paper tail into the child's sash, evidence not failure, and points 2 fingers toward the river bend. Found later, her chin promises. The papermaker jogs by with his pole and a grin that means he has ideas, and none of them involve scolding water. The musician kneels and inspects her instrument. The high string lies across the board like a pale hair, its patience spent. She smiles at it the way you smile at a broom that broke doing hero work. We'll borrow a little moon, her eyes tell you, and she stands, gathering the gayagem as carefully as if it were carrying tea. You hear the weaver's pine yard calling in resin-scented syllables. Silk lives there. Silk remembers how to become sound. The pines receive you with their long, cool breath. Looms rest in the half-light, heddles asleep. The weaver ant steps from between frames with a skein draped over her forearms, indigo dusk shimmering where threads cross. 4 strings, the lighter, her hands advise, and she lifts a paler bundle from a basket. Undyed silk, a quiet that wants a task. The dyer brings a little bowl of rice paste thin as patience and sets it beside a polished brass mirror, the very one from the market that offered you a rumor of a face earlier. Moon, she says, tapping it. We'll ask it to sit with us. The boy with the tray kneels and steadies the lantern behind the mirror. The brass catches the flame and the sky both, and when the dyer tilts it, a soft oval of borrowed light spills across your hands and the musician's lap. Not bright, just enough. Moon on pond, the younger weaver laughs, recognizing the hem you chose earlier. You grin, the night likes a theme. The musician shows you how to twist the silk. 2 strands first, then 2 become 4. You roll them on your thigh with your palm, not hard, only steady, and the fibers settle into each other the way neighbors do when the festival drum starts. Every few spans, she brushes the thread with watered rice paste. It drinks and quiets its flyaway hairs. The child, promoted to assistant of holding the other end, grips the free tail with solemn dignity, and the boy with the tray watches like a junior official auditing moonlight. When the length is right, you anchor it to a peg and draw it across the board edge to even its temper, like stroking a horse until it remembers walk before trot. The weaver ant hands you a tiny weight, a smooth nut tied to silk, to hang from the middle while the paste dries, so the new string learns to be straight without promises you can't keep. In the bowl of well water the bell-keeper gave earlier, the moon sits politely. The brass mirror coaxes that reflection onto the thread, and the thread gleams like a promise overheard. Mounting comes next. The musician shows you the tailpiece knot, loop, gift the tail, tuck, and you pat it like the sleepy dog of every good knot. You feed the new line under the far bridge, over the board, up to the tuning peg. Your fingers remember the oar. Hold lightly, then turn with intention. The peg creaks, a small door, not yet a song. You wind, pause, breathe across the string as you did across T. Let it answer. The musician presses near the bridge to settle the twist. Tighten a fraction. Listen. The thread speaks, low and uncertain, then clearer. The jar lady leans on the post, pretending to study the weather. The potter scratches ash off his sleeve with a contented thumb. The papermaker returns long enough to set a square of dry sheet under your elbow so no grit argues with the board. Tuning is a conversation, not an order. The musician plucks a neighbor string, then the new one, and your ear, educated tonight by bell and boat and loom, hears the distance between them. You climb that distance in small, polite steps. When the new string threatens to brag, you back it off the tiniest breath. Everyone here respects modesty. The child's eyes widen as the line finds its voice. First, a reed whisper, then a thread of silver. You clear the lingering paste with a thumb, stroke once along the length, and the string thanks you by learning to ring. Play, the weaver ant urges, stepping back. The musician settles, spine a soft bow, hands poised. Her thumb draws a note, patient, tender, and the fresh silk answers without rasp, as if the moon smoothed its throat before entering. She tests a small run, then another, dropping the melody back into the village's pulse. The bell on the hillside sends, right on time, a slow bronze vowel that fits under the new tone like a riverbed under water. The child inhales like someone arriving home. Jar lady slips a honeyed pine nut into a waiting mouth. The boy with the tray, having fulfilled flame duties, takes the frayed end of the broken string and knots it into a tiny bracelet that would never hold a kite but might hold a memory. He ties it around the child's wrist. Loop, tuck, breathe. The bracelet settles with the gravity of a promotion, assistant of letting go without losing. You pluck the new string once just to feel it in your own bones. The note travels down your wrist into your spoon charm, taps twice, approves. The musician grins at you, a flash of moon behind clouds, and nods toward the river as if to say, with this voice back we can escort lanterns and kites and wandering hearts alike. Around the pines, dye pot sigh. The kiln breathes like a sleeping dragon, and somewhere down in the lanes, the carp windsock flips a lazy fin, satisfied with the evening's negotiations. Thank the moon, the dyer says, tilting the brass so the oval of light slides across faces and hands, leaving everything a little shinier than before. You bow to the mirror's patient glow, to the bowl that held a piece of sky, to the silk that remembered how to become music, to the helpers whose titles exceed bureaucracy, keepers of heat, knots, paste, and courage. The musician lifts her instrument. The first phrase is a ribbon laid along the path toward water. You gather lantern, thread, small hand, and all the soft agreements of the night, and step back onto the lane that never hurries, but never loses anyone willing to walk at its pace. By the time you reach the river, the night has arranged itself like a careful table. Reeds tidied, willows combed, a low blue spread smooth across the current, as if the sky had lowered to sip. The boatman stands in the shallow, trousers rolled, tying two barges with those modest knots that behave. Loop, gift the tail, tuck, pat. The musician sets her Gaia gym on a folded mat at the bow. She tests the new silk, and it answers with a clean, even light, the kind of voice that knows how to carry without trying. The boy, who once guarded oil with fierce dignity, brings the ember cup. The rice cake rescuer brings a grin. The child with the bracelet of broken string holds a fresh sky prayer square, blank for now, like a healed breath. Lantern frames wait along the bank, their oil-brushed paper ready to glow. The potter arrives with shallow, warm dishes pulled from the kiln's gentle mouth, heat still breathing in their clay. He sets them along the gunnels, so small drafts will step around flame instead of through it. Clay makes weather, his eyebrows joke, and the river accepts the forecast. The weaver ant ties 2 indigo ribbons to the prow, moon on pond hems barely visible until the brass mirror the dyer carries catches a sliver of sky and lends it generously to the cloth. Lighting begins as all proper magic does, politely. The boatman sets the ember in a tray. You tip wicks, tip, hush, bloom, tip, hush, bloom. The musician blesses each success with 2 notes, silver and steadier silver. One by one, lanterns stand their posts, each cup a small attentive sun. Fireflies rise from the reeds, late-shift scribes, and dot the air with punctuation the river reads and nods at. You lay a sky prayer square beside the child. "What do you write?" your glance asks. The child hesitates, then draws a kite with a long, brave tail, and under it a single neat word the jar lady taught earlier: return. You push off. The barges sigh free, the shore loosens its fingers. Or to seam, your palm remembers the boatman's grammar, and the bow finds the line between smooth and ruffled. The current begins the sentence, you reply with oar feathers, careful and quiet. The musician leans into a low measure that rides under voices. The new string hums like polished grain. The boy in charge of flame patrol checks each cup with a scholar's frown. When wind leans in to gossip, he and you lift your hands, 2 small walls of kindness, and the flames remember their manners. On shore, laughter ripples, then travels after you along the water. Jar lady raises a jar lid and produces pickled greens in a dish so tidy it must have studied under etiquette masters. The grandmother in charge of terraces sends a gourd of stew by a nimble cousin. It arrives without spilling because the river understands soup's priorities. You taste with the spoon the carpenter shaped for you. The ribbon chimes its approval. 1 tap for depth, another for balance. Weather report, delicious, you announce, dignified as any official, and the potter laughs into his sleeve. You drift beneath willows that whisper all the right gossip, the bell-keeper's 3rd bronze vowel, low and long, the loom yard's small exhale, the kiln's slow pulse taking its time to cool. The musician tests a higher figure. The silk holds, sweet and clear, no rasp now, just a hint of the moon's earlier permission. The child presses the sky prayer square to the lantern's frame, smooths a corner the way you smooth a thought before you say it, and breathes across the ink until it decides to stay. At the bend, the river darkens where depth keeps secrets. The boatman touches your shoulder, points with his mouth, a gesture minimal enough not to upset the current. In the willow fringe, a pale shape flutters, attached to a sulking twig by a twist of thread that forgot it had snapped. Not drama, just possibility. You ease the oar, the boatman plants the pole, the musician hushes her strings so the night can listen. The boy with flame duty shields the nearest cup. The child's fingers find your sleeve, not to clutch, only to agree. Feather, the boatman reminds, and you do. Blade flat, then turned, the barge stepping sideways, like a cat avoiding a puddle. The potter leans with a reed hook. The paper maker, who apparently cannot be kept from rivers any more than rivers can be kept from bends, appears on the bank with a longer pole and a grin that means, "Watch this be simple." He lifts. The twig sighs. The kite gives a very small shiver and decides home is an acceptable option. It collapses like a pleased sparrow into the boatman's waiting hands, not proud, just relieved. The child doesn't cheer. This is a village that respects modest triumphs. But the bracelet of broken string taps the small wrist exactly once, and that counts. You push the kite beside the warm clay dishes to dry its thin bones. Repairs can be a morning story. For now, the river asks to be beautiful and obeyed. You let the barges drift again. Lanterns write their constellations on the surface. The fireflies add errata. Frogs stamp the margins with rhythmic approvals. The musician's melody opens into a wide, slow arc that anyone can walk. She stitches in souvenirs, tea steam, kiln breath, loom hush, bell wind, so gently you feel your rib cage take the shape of the village without noticing. A playful gust arrives, more mischief than weather. Several flams gutter, reconsider. The acting secretary of keeping flames well behaved plants the tray. You build your hand walls, and the warm clay along the gunnels lift a quiet thermal and coaxes the wicks upright. Clay makes weather, you repeat, and the boatman, not otherwise given to compliments, taps the oar once against the hull in a commendation knock. The barges pass the market edge, where stallholders lean on elbows, shoulders, each other. Sweets vendor slips honeyed pine nuts into traveling palms. Basket maker drums a shallow tray, and the sound crosses the water like a small parade drum that doesn't need to win. The spoon maker lifts a spoon skyward, and the moon, pleased with the evening's theme, fits perfectly in its bowl for a heartbeat before sliding on. By and by, the river widens to a calm that acts like a room. You let both barges rest there, oars shipped, lanterns bright, clay warm, laughter unknotted. The musician plays softer still, the new string a line of light you could thread a dream upon. The bellkeeper just once sends a note that lands in the center of the water and ripples out until even the fireflies adjust their commas. People breathe, the kind of exhale that empties pockets of worry no one intends to carry home. The child leans against your shoulder with the unapologetic elegance only children and cats manage. The kite waits, a quiet wing with plans. When you turn back toward shore, it isn't because the moment ends. It simply spreads behind you like a made bed. The boatman sets the barges for the dock. You give the gentle two-knock signal. A lantern on the bank brightens, obliging as always. Hands reach, knots become unknots. Clay dishes find earth again. You step onto the sand and feel the river still moving in your knees, patient, certain. The jar lady tucks a new ribbon in your hand for mornings. The weaver ant squeezes your arm and says nothing, because nothing is required. The musician's last phrase tonight is a doorway left open. The village stands in that doorway with you, warm, lantern lit, unhurried. And the night, pleased with its own manners, lowers the lid another careful inch. Dawn turns the river from ink to brushed silk, the color of rice water poured from a first rinse. Along the wharf, the reeds hold tiny beads of night that decide, one by one, to become morning. The lantern barges rest, with their flames pinched out, cups warm, paper skins pearly and pleased with what they did. The boatman stands with trousers rolled and that patient grin that belongs to people who know currents by first name. He taps the oar twice against the hull, commendation, farewell, and the sound sits in your chest like a well-behaved drum. The musician arrives with the gayajum at her hip, the new silk string glowing faint as breath on glass. She doesn't speak. She plucks a slow figure that changes the air the way steam changes a room. Soft edges, warm corners. The child with the bracelet of broken string trots in, holding the kite you rescued from the willows. The papermaker has mended its seam with a line of paste so neat even the wind will hesitate before arguing. The boy, formerly known as assistant to not making a mess, carries a tray with 2 little cups and a kettle the color of early light. He looks taller by exactly 1 night's worth of duties. Jar lady, already awake because jars wake before roosters, sets down a plate of radish coins, their blush mimicking the horizon. The grandmother from the terrace pours stew into a gourd for travel luck, which is either hospitality or a conspiracy to keep you fed for the next 3 lifetimes. The weaver aunt ties a short indigo strand around the kite's tail, moon on pond, of course, so it remembers to come back even when sky compliments it too loudly. The potter, sleeves ash soft, approaches with a small secret in his palm, a bead the size of a bean, shaped like a jar, and fired to the color of tea wood. Weather report portable, his eyes joke, and everybody pretends not to grin as hard as they do. The elder from the red persimmon gate appears at the edge of the pier, his kettle steaming like a contented spirit. He taps the lid once, twice, then pours barley tea into those tiny cups the boy carries. Steam receiver, the air reminds you, and it would be rude not to breathe across the rim exactly as taught. The steam lifts to meet you, the barley opens, and the flavor finds a chair just under your heart and sits with impeccable posture. The musician braids a phrase through that swallow, and the bell-keeper, punctual as weather, lets a single bronze syllable roll down from the hill until even the cat blinks in agreement. Small ceremonies assemble. The dyer tilts her brass mirror and lends the river a last sip of moon, smudged now into morning, but generous anyway. The boatman rubs a thumb over the oar's worn handle as if telling it a bedtime story after a night shift. The spoonmaker produces your tasting spoon from behind his back, polished once more, edge trued, and with a mock-serious bow, he ties the potter's jar bead to your ribbon with a knot so sensible it could run the market. Loop, gift the tail, tuck, pat. It settles just above the spoon's neck, tapping twice like a polite friend who knows your door code. There is a moment for counting inheritances, not out loud, just with your hands. The pine-dyed ribbon that remembers the loom yard and the smell of resin. The spoon that learned calm from grain and from your nearly respectable sanding. The sachet of roasted barley the elder slipped you, now lighter by several steadyings. The small jar bead that says weather can be read without panic. The kite's healed seam and the child's brave bracelet. The new string that learned to sing after you borrowed the moon. You do not feel like a collector. You feel like a cup that was filled carefully. Time, the boatman's chin says, which is different from hurry. The barges don't need to move. You do. Not far, just along the whitening river to where the village's lane first took your feet and showed them how to be slower than your thoughts. People gather the way goodbyes gather here, without orchestration, full of ordinary tasks, making room for a bow. The weaver aunt wipes paste from her fingers. The papermaker leans his pole. The potter reties the reed screen in his mind for later. The grandmother checks a jar lid by habit and finds it perfect. Even the bell wind pauses long enough to let the chime say, in their small metal language, "Don't forget to eat." The musician walks beside you, the gayajim's low notes stepping where your sandals step. The lane remembers you and edits its stones to be kind. At the gourd gate you touch the cloth with stitched waves, and it hums, polite as ever. The elder's courtyard breathes barley. The kettle sighs. He raises 2 fingers, blessing and joke, and you answer with a bow that accidentally becomes serious. The carpenter lifts a spoon like a salute. The basket maker taps his tray so softly the sound is only for those who tried weaving once and learned respect. The dye pots under the pines exhale their last night heat, and the looms hold their breaths in threads that will be stories by noon. At the wooden gate with its fringe of bells, you slow without planning to. Mist lays along the threshold like a sleeping ribbon. The gayajim's final phrase unspools and drapes itself over the morning, a shawl of sound meant to keep your shoulders from forgetting. The musician slips the tiniest charm into your palm, silk knotted around a single rice seed, for hungry thoughts or for generous ones, her smile translates. You tie it beside the jar bead. The two greet each other like neighbors who share a fence and a recipe. The child steps forward, kite tucked under one arm, and bumps your elbow with the dignity of a captain christening a ship. "Return," says the sky prayer square, and you nod because some words are both request and instruction. The boy with the tray of flames that aren't needed now tries to look ordinary and fails handsomely. Jar Lady's sleeve carries a smudge of paste she will never confess. The boatman offers a 2-knock farewell on a gatepost. The bell-keeper sends one last bronze thread that loops around your wrist and tucks itself into your ribbon. You look once more. The roofs neat as handwriting, the terraces practicing their bows, the reeds rehearsing their gossip, the river finishing the sentence it began before you were born. And then you step through the gate you first entered, carrying tea warmth in your palms and music along your spine. Behind you, small bells answer each other like cousins. Ahead, the whitening river widens, and the gayagium's last note, still traveling, finds the seam between where you have been and where your next breath waits, and guides you home, as if home were simply the place where steam and string and kindness keep remembering your name. The night thins. The day opens its quiet hand. You go, slow as a lantern settling on water, and nothing hurries you, not even time. The river is wide now, and the banks lean back, and the sound that remains is the gentle after-ring of bronze folded into the soft hush of reeds. So let your shoulders soften and your jaw loosen. Let your tongue rest against the roof of your mouth, and let the breath you are holding slide out in one long, even ribbon that makes room for the next and the next and the next. Because nothing here requires quickness, and nothing here needs effort. You are already being carried, already being guided the way a lantern is guided by its own small sun. And you may notice how the steam from that last barley cup has become a memory of warmth settling into the palms, and then into the wrists, and then into the slow rivers that run through your arms. And you might feel how the little jar bead taps once, very lightly, to say the weather is fine, the weather inside is fine. And the thread at your wrist remembers the calm of pine shade, and the patience of looms, and even the oar lesson is still here, teaching the body to move only as much as the current asks, which is to say, hardly at all. Let the lantern barges grow small behind your eyelids. Let the market stalls fold themselves neatly. Let the kiln go on breathing without you watching, because it knows how. And let the bell's long vowel lengthen into a path you can walk with your eyes closed. And if any thought arrives like a gust, you can lift your hands the way you sheltered wicks, making two small walls of kindness, and the flame of attention steadies by itself, remembering its manners. And in this soft place, the kite is mended, the string is new, the seam is known, and the air feels like a shawl being drawn over the shoulders by someone who wants you to rest. Even the cat has signed the paperwork and declared the night officially complete. So settle and sink and feel the quiet stack like folded cloth, layer upon layer, and notice how the last note of the gayagyam has become a line of light inside your breathing, and how that line can be followed without trying, all the way to the gate where little bells barely move, and then further still to the room where you are, and the pillow that waits, and the fan's soft hum, and the simple comfort of being exactly where you are meant to be, with nothing left to fix and nothing left to fetch, and a village of small, patient blessings keeping watch at the edge of sleep. End of story. Sweet dreams.